Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 106 of the Noclip podcast. How you doing, Jeremy?
I'm doing wonderful.
Are you now? Did you enjoy your time in Los Angeles?
I did, but the drive to and from was... I got a notification on my phone that said, do not travel unless you are escaping flash floods, and I think at that point I was.
Or interviewing game developers. I think you meant that was in parentheses.
They did add that, yeah.
They did, yes. Bit of a funny podcast this week, folks. We spent much of this week in Southern California interviewing. Well, there was some Heart Machine stuff, and we're also at a AAA studio talking about a video game which you will hear about next. Well, no, the game came out, but the documentary you'll hear about in the next couple of weeks or something. We can't say quite yet, but it was a really cool one. Studio we'd never been to before. Big popular video game, so that'll be coming to Noclip in a little bit. But so we didn't have time to do a regular podcast this week, but we did just get off the phone with one Sam Barlow, and we talked a bunch about Immortality, didn't we?
Yeah, it was fantastic. And he had some excellent stories about like inside baseball, kind of Hollywood filmmaker stuff about a bunch of different actors and filmmakers and movies that inspired Immortality. So it's if you like movies or games, I feel like this is a treasure trove for either
Who
one.
doesn't like movies or games? You've always some sort of Luddite.
There's some monster out there. I don't know why they're listening to this, but...
I always feel bad when I use the word Luddite in a sort of a negative connotation, because that was sort of there was a bunch of people who didn't want machines to take over their jobs, right?
Yeah.
And they unionized, and then they were all murdered.
Yeah, and they smashed all the machines. It's cool.
They did. So in a way, we should. The people in the Matrix sequels were Luddites, weren't they?
So true, dude.
But we like them. See,
So
this
true.
type of literature and film insight you can look forward to in the podcast. I want to give a shout out to all of our amazing Battle Pass holders, without whom none of this would be possible. These specific 8 people or so: Jason Drury, Cody Krieger, Sven Huster, Forrest Pruitt, Andy Fagan, Cameron Ladd, George Sikotis, Jacob Godserve, and Tohir Tiliev. Thank you all so much. Next, all of our patrons, you can go check out the Gloomwood developer breakdown over on the main Noclip channel. Nice little, cool little guy there. Big fan of that video. Great job to Jesse for putting it together. And I will say, originally this was gonna be a spoiler cast, wasn't it? And I'm not sure if it is now. What do you think? I don't think it's necessarily spoilery. You'd probably want to have played Immortality though, just because we don't explain anything about the game.
It wouldn't make a lot of sense if you haven't played Immortality, but theoretically you could listen to this and still enjoy Immortality.
Yeah, maybe this is what puts you over the edge. Maybe you just want to listen to people with European accents, 2/3 of it, as you're going to sleep. I don't know. But yeah, it's a good 90-minute conversation about movies and games and casting. And, we didn't get into editing much, but, lots of film history and all that sort of stuff. We mostly sat back and let Sam chat, honestly. So it's the way it should be. So enjoy this podcast, and we'll be back next week at a regularly scheduled episode. See you then. Sam Barlow, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. We don't often get to do spoiler casts, and this one's kind of hot off the press because we spent most of December lovingly talking about Immortality for Game of the Year. First of all, how you doing? How was your 2022? Is it quiet now on the opposite side of launch? And I guess award season continues to roll on.
Yeah, we're getting there. We took a bit more time to do the mobile version, so that kind of spread things out a little bit. And the awards thing is cool because you get nominations, and
that's what you do it for, right? That's what it's all for.
All see it can go up on stage and have Jeff Keighley slap you on the back.
Exactly, yeah. We're all there for the Keighley's. We were just at a AAA studio yesterday, and it was one of the ones where they have 50 BAFTAs. You're just can we have one? Would you mind if we just put it in the bathroom? It would look quite nice.
You have to sign it when you get a BAFTA. Each one has its own unique serial number, and you have to sign. And they got me to sign it on the night of the BAFTAs this was for Her Story, when I was very drunk, and I had 3 of them, and they're like, you just need to come with us over here. And the stupid. I mean, it's whatever. They give you the physical awards. I don't know if they still do this. But at the end of the night, they give you the physical award to take home.
Right.
Right. So there was me with Her Story as a solo dev 3 heavy ass BAFTAs.
Getting
but
on the tube in Piccadilly.
Well, we ended up in some club, and we stole a champagne bucket from the BAFTAs to carry them around. So my beautiful BAFTAs have a lot of just like little chinks and scratches from this evening around London they had. But they make you sign up and say it'd be like this unique barcode, whatever. This is Sam Barlow's BAFTA, and I was like, oh, does this mean I can't sell it or do something with it? And they were like, no, you can do.
You
can sell it.
There was a couple of things maybe it was you can't sell it, but I was like, can I like make pornography with it or something?
Right, yeah.
Like,
you need to know
what am I signing to? And I was drunk as well, and they were like, no, you can do that. Like you could. I think they said you could do your glamour photo shoot with this BAFTA, but it's just the selling. It's one of those things. There's one thing you just absolutely can never do.
Could you melt it down and then sell it? Like if it wasn't a BAFTA anymore?
I think I did dig into the melting.
Yeah, you could make like something like a nice set of coasters. Because if you've got 3 of them, 3 is almost too many, right? Because 1 is like, I made this, but 3 is a bit like, you're just showing off now, mate.
You could award a BAFTA to someone else, though. Like if there was a piece of media you really enjoyed, you could give
re-gift
someone a BAFTA
it.
now. Yeah. No, you could present it to give a BAFTA and make it official. Put a new plaque on it.
You could melt it and make it your face. You know what I mean? You could get like a mold. That'd be good. The Barlows. Who would you give it to? Who would you give your 2022 Barlow to? What was the game that you enjoyed the most?
Gosh, from this year? So I didn't play a lot.
Putting you on the spot.
I didn't play a lot because we were busy shipping a game. I appreciated what it must have taken to get Penitent.
Oh, yeah.
I struggle because whenever I write about it, my autocorrect fixes it.
Penitent?
Penitent, or I almost sent like an awards thing the other day, and it changed it to sediment.
Wow, that's a sequel.
But I enjoyed that one. I love Tunic.
Nice.
I like slightly broke Tunic for myself because I was so into it that I kind of thought, I don't know how much of Tunic you played, but it has like some very, very deep meta puzzles in it. And because that was the vibe of the game, I was like, oh, I need to do all this to win, right? Just to even get to the final boss, I'll have to do all this stuff. So and my family were away, so I got very deep into Tunic. Got all of the like super granular meta stuff. Finished the game, and then I look online, and it's like, this is not like you could have won the game 20 hours ago.
Oh yeah,
like, this is like the deep hardcore stuff, and so I was like, I don't know. I slightly broke myself taking it that seriously.
That's funny, yeah, because the game offers it up for a lot of people. They're like, hey, you completed the game, but do you want to go back and check out some of that sort of stuff?
So I just never went. As soon as I realized I could go to like the final boss, essentially, I was like, oh, I will not go there until I have everything.
Right, it's like the Zelda thing. It's like the Breath of the Wild thing.
And there's like a room with stuff in it, and there's other bits and pieces, and there's stuff that you're tracking. So I was like, oh, I need to fill this room. I need to track all these things before I even go to Ganon.
Excellent.
Right? The equivalent.
So you're in the terrific position of having made both games and movies in games. Which is harder? Before we get into the spoilery stuff, which was harder to do, or which is the one that you're like most intimidated by, maybe?
Well, I've only ever had a traditional video game cancelled on me.
Right.
So
that would be Legacy of Kain, right? That would be Dead Son?
I've had a couple. I've had a few.
Okay.
We rescued a project called Elvian at one point. We rescued it, but obviously didn't rescue it well enough. And then, Legacy of Kain, that got cancelled. I feel like there's been others as well.
Was that what Nosgoth ended up being? Or something like that?
That's a whole other podcast.
It's a whole other podcast.
They were doing a multiplayer version. The best thing about that Legacy of Kain game, it was 3 years of my life, the hardest work I've done, and for the whole team was, it was like all the really horrible hard stories you hear about making AAA games, except we never got to ship it. So
right.
But the good thing was, so I'm working on it and I'm directing the single player game. At some point we were told you have to have a multiplayer game. So they brought in psionics. who at that point had like done a couple of FPS add-ons and stuff. This was pre-Rocket League. So throughout that development, which was very difficult, I was constantly being, pushed like, are you sure this is how you tell a story in a video game?
Right.
And on the multiplayer side, Psylocke were being pushed like, are you sure this is how to make a compelling multiplayer game? So the game gets cancelled, but they kind of tried to cut their losses by spinning out the multiplayer component as a free-to-play game. Because I think that was a time where if you're a games publisher, you could lose money on a free-to-play project because all the bosses would be like, oh, well, yeah, we want to invest in that.
We can risk over
R&D,
there.
put all your
Right.
R&D in
Yeah.
free-to-play. But 2015 was the year. So after that game cancelled, I went and made Her Story. Psylocke continued with Nosgoth, but also made Rocket League. So 2015 was the year where all of the awards, Her Story was up for like Story and Game of the Year. Rocket League was up for Best Multiplayer Game. And every awards, without being like too mean about it,
Yeah.
like me and Psylocke would be like high five, wave over at the Square Enix table. Like,
No, hate to say I told you so. Yeah, we've a soft spot in our heart for Sonics. That was the first ever Noclip documentary we ever did, was with those folks. And when I found out it was the Nosgoth people, I was like, what a weird. Video games are so strange. People just make whatever
they were in such a weird position as well because like Rocket League blew up, right? And they were still obligated to keep working on Nosgoth.
Oh, crazy!
So they had like half the office was working on Nosgoth, and the other half is like, we're making the biggest multiplayer game in the world. This is a huge hit. Everyone loves us, right? So I think that was.
They're probably thematically on opposite ends of the universe as well. It's like this story-rich lore vampire asymmetric multiplayer game, and I guess they're both multiplayer games. So there you go. Anyway, let's jump into Immortality. Sounds like there's too much to talk to you about because you've been in the industry so long and seen so much. Just let's jump into the themes a little bit. And you sort of one of the things that stuck out to me a little bit when I was sort of regarding your career and instances like Legacy of Kain, Dead Son, or any of the other ones, was the sort of aspect of Immortality is that none of these movies came out. That it is kind of and often because of the sort of silliness of business or happenstance or an auteur being not happy with it. Was there how much of like your experiences was in Immortality just from outside of the creativity side of it, but just the business side of making games?
I think not necessarily consciously, but it took a few years. But like Immortality is very, very much a product of making Legacy of Kain. Like, and not in specifics so much as just like, I had a young family. We're working very hard on this game. It's like, it's not quite killing us, but like it's that level where you're just putting everything into it, right? Blood, sweat, and tears. And, everyone on the team is making compromises. It's hard work, but you're doing it because you have this push to make it. And I was like very aware across that game as well. Like I just had kids. There is like a switch in the human genetics where once you've had kids, there's a little bit where your body's like, it's okay now. Like you've done it, and I like focus on them. But like prior to that, like as like a single person, I'm like, I have to create great art, and this will be my legacy, right? And I'm putting everything into this. And then your body's like, chill, dude, chill. But I remember we had I worked with a writer on that game, James Smythe, who's this fantastic British novelist, and we'd like occasionally have these kinds of discussions where, he is writing novels that are like literary fiction or kind of literary science fiction or whatever you want to call them, and they're getting incredible reviews. But unless you blow up and become the next Harry Potter, like the audience for a novelist in 2022 or whenever it was then, is limited, but it's his book, right? And he has the complete control over it, and it's a very direct connection with his audience. And we were working on Legacy of Kain, and like I'd made Shattered Memories was a very personal game to me. But with Legacy of Kain, we were aware we were making compromises. Like this was, big AAA game. There were green light committees. It was the thing that, BioShock did. So many of these games have to do. Last of Us does. We know that we have to have 5 to 10 hours of visceral combat and upgrade trees in this game because that's what we've been told we have to make. How do you tell a deep and interesting story? So you end up analyzing the violence and trying to twist it and add layers to it and stuff. So we were trying to do something significant and interesting, but we knew we were making some kind of compromises. So we would have these discussions of, although this is not as pure a connection with the audience as you might have in a novel, like if this game comes out, it will meet millions of people will play it, so that breadth of connection.
Yeah.
But then you get into the really perverse thing about video games, which is the legacy aspect where, James puts out a novel. In 100 years' time, that novel still essentially works, right? There are aspects to how it might have aged, but whereas, you take Silent Hill Shattered Memories, a cult game that I made has dedicated fans, but to play that game now, the effort you have to make to get an original Wii, buy a copy of it on disc, or do some hardcore emulation stuff. And then even if you do that, just, graphically, what looked decent in 2009, you're not as immersed in the character faces and all these things. So, you're then talking about, there's a difference between putting out a piece of art that maybe makes a big splash, right? You put out a big game and millions of people play it, and that's important, and there's a connection there. But in 10, 20, 30 years, maybe that thing's gone. And so then you're talking about kind of longevity and legacy and the idea of art as an immortality project. But yeah, there was, again, not even really consciously thinking about it. Definitely that experience of, because I think when you think about film, as we do in Immortality, there is a very decent correlation between a large-scale video game and a movie, just in terms of the number of people, the technical effort, the risk, the finances, and then you have all those kind of tensions. So I think that was, there was definitely some of that DNA in there.
Hadn't considered that actually. You're making the point of literature. Yeah, when you read a book that was written, or a poem or anything that was written hundreds of years ago, there is a sort of a prescience with that art which you don't get in movies, and it feels like one of the nice things about watching old giallos is that you know that it's from an era and a moment in time. But I hadn't considered that. Yes, it does sort of make it. Does it make it less impactful? Does it make it impactful in a different way? Does it make it less immortal?
I think the thing with movies, and Marissa Marcel might observe this at some point, but there is what does make movies specifically different as an art form is that sense of capturing something, right? Is the photograph of capturing. So, we talked a little bit about this when we were doing the Ambrosio stuff, but if you look at a historical drama or you look at sci-fi, right? In theory, these are two genres that should not age as much because they're not set during the era, right? But if you watch a sci-fi from the 70s, goddamn, it is the 70s, right? You watch Star Wars, they have the moustaches and the fashion and everything. Or, you watch a historical drama, and again, just the costuming is very easy to date where these things are from. But there is something beautiful about that actual record of a time and place. I love, and I used this project to justify watching it 100 times during the pandemic, but Dirty Harry, right, is an evil film. It's the message, the themes, the politics of that movie are somewhat abhorrent, but it is a beautiful movie, just in the execution. But in as much as it's evil, it is 100% capturing what people were thinking then, right? And it is this beautiful kind of record. Whereas, the technology aspect in video games is such that, it doesn't give you as clean a route back in. And I don't know if that's because it's early days, right? If you go back as far as early silent cinema, there is more of a technical barrier
Right.
to appreciating.
You don't have an organist in your living room to, play the themes as you're watching it.
I took my youngest kid to see. There was a performance of a screening of Nosferatu with a live pianist, and they quite enjoyed it. I was like, it does drag a little, but they enjoyed it.
Our local one used to have it. Jeremy, did you ever go to the Grand Lake Theatre in Oakland?
No, but they used to do like a live orchestra with.
There was like
with
one
screenings,
guy.
right?
He'd come up out of the ground. He'd come up. I don't know how, the organ or whatever the thing was called would come up out of the ground, and he was like one of two people who knew how to play it. And the guy was like in his 80s, and he did one night a week. He'd come in and play for like 15 minutes before they showed like Interstellar. He wasn't doing the movie.
Did he like riff on what the movie was about to be?
I don't think so. I think he had like 5 songs he played. Yeah. He was a tired old artist at that stage, I think.
When Birdman was in theaters, I believe they had a guy for some screenings who did like live improvised jazz drumming.
Really?
That movie had like the drum-driven kind of soundtrack going throughout the whole thing, and I guess there was live performances with someone who was improvising the whole time. But it's really interesting. Like I would love to see something like that where someone is kind of improvising based on what's going on in the movie. But I as someone who's done much more film than music, I can't imagine paying attention to a movie. I mean, I imagine you just have to watch the movie so much that you internalize kind of the beats of it to do that.
I saw it wasn't deliberately fascinating, but they did a screening of There Will Be Blood.
Oh, cool.
In New York with the damn it, it's the orchestra that actually did the Telling Lies soundtrack. They're fantastic. The London, they're amazing. Fantastic, beautiful modern orchestra. And they did a live performance of the score for There Will Be Blood. Because it's, the Radiohead guy who's like...
Johnny Greenwood?
Tom York?
Yeah.
Or Johnny, okay.
Greenwood, yeah. So he's just doing like all the best film scores right now.
Yeah.
But they did this live performance of the score, and it was a great insight into sound design, because I guess when they do these kind of live scores, they give them a version of the film that has the music taken out.
Oh.
Obviously, right? Because otherwise
yeah.
it's going to be fine. So they've got this print of the movie that has the music taken out. There's a key scene halfway, 2/3 way through There Will Be Blood, where somebody gets shot. Somehow, in doing this print, they deleted or lost the gunshot sound effect. So you got to this key dramatic moment, the character lifts up the gun, and the gunshot was off camera, because that was like the choice they made was to cut to the reaction. You'd hear the gunshot, so the guy's dead. But because the gunshot didn't play, you suddenly had this mass confusion, and you could just sense in the audience, like, wait, did he just kill the guy?
That's amazing.
Did he not? And it like totally derailed the whole movie. This single sound effect that somehow had been, missed.
Popped out of the mix, yeah.
They should have done a diegetic in the theater. They should have had like a gun with blanks in there.
Yeah, some guy realizes what's happening, and he's like, bang!
Yeah, if anyone has a gun in the audience, please pull it out now and fire it once.
On the final day of our high school Oliver, I was playing what's his name? Not Fagin. Fagin's boss.
Bill Sykes.
Bill Sykes. Thank you.
Oh, right, you were the psycho.
I was. I had my Jemmy, which I went around assaulting people with, children and women mostly, by the sounds of that play. But at the end, I'm with Nancy on top of the thing, and I get shot by a punter in the crowd, and my buddy had a fake gun, and there was a prop gun off thing, and he goes to do it, and off stage all he hears click 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 click, and the two of us, our eyes just fucking, and he just went, like you said, bang, and I fell over, and the whole place burst into laughter. It was like the opposite reaction, but for a final night, it was pretty good.
Yeah,
can't complain. When we were talking about it, because Jeremy, you played Immortality before me, and I was playing back in pretty late this year. It was kind of November time, and I kept texting you about stuff, and then because I was interested from like a film perspective, and you've seen a lot more. I feel like you have a lot more of like I'm less of a cinephile when it comes to like a lot of these eras, and you were constantly saying, oh, there was this, oh, there was this, oh, there was this, bringing up these things. Not to make it a whole podcast about references, but I'd love for you to ask Sam about some of those movies or influences and stuff.
For sure, yeah. I started making, obviously I was taking notes while I was playing the game, but I started making a little side panel list of just kind of like I'd call them more homage than references, because it was, I don't know if you played Signalis or not, but I thought Signalis did a similar thing where it constantly was drawing upon different source material, like Robert Chambers' the King in Yellow, as well as a bunch of other survival horror games like Resident Evil and Silent Hill. But when it was pulling from those things, it always felt like it made it its own, and I felt like Immortality was incorporating a lot of these cinematic elements, but doing them in ways where it wasn't just going like, oh, remember Black Narcissus, remember matte painting. So yeah, I'm curious, like I saw you posted a movie list of some things that you were either watching or were influenced by, but I'm curious to hear kind of some of the bigger influences when you were making, or initially coming up with Immortality, at least.
I think like the big starting point was, and this actually got slightly darker the last couple of weeks. I mean, it's funny because, yeah, there is no starting point, right? There's just tons of stuff that's feeding in, and at some point, but certainly, like when I was consciously thinking of like this specific version of the idea, there was a BBC, I think, interview with Olivia Hussey and her co-star at the time of the making of Romeo and Juliet, which was the Zeffirelli version, and they were both 15 or 14. So that's recently in the news because, I mean, famously in that movie, I mean, we watched it in my like high school English class, and it was this whole thing because you see some boobs and you see a butt and stuff, but it's now blowing up because, you know, they did not consent as 14 or 15-year-olds to do semi-nude.
Right. There's like a lawsuit, right, at the moment.
Yeah. Because in California, they've kind of opened it up. So like, hey, even if this stuff was a while ago, like we need to clean house on it. But there was this interview with the two young stars from this BBC guy. And he's like very old school BBC. And he's interviewing them. And throughout the whole interview, Olivia Hussey is smoking a cigarette.
Right.
And at some point, he comments on the fact that she's a 15-year-old, I think she was 15, smoking and how weird and shocking that is. And she just gives him this look like, you have no idea what 15-year-old girls are up to. Like,
right, yeah. But
she has, like, throughout the whole interview, this, like, she has a kind of gravitas. And there was something about the way they were treating her almost like an alien. Like she was this strange creature. There was something about the way that making her into a film star at that age and the airs of being an adult had, you know, gave her this kind of vibe. And so they were treating it very strange. And there was another interview that I threw on my mood board that was David Letterman interviewing Phoebe Cates. And it was Phoebe Cates had done the kind of Blue Lagoon ripoff and Ridgemont High, Fast Times, and maybe Gremlins, but she's still very young. And the way that Letterman treats her in this interview is like you could lock him up if this was 2022. It's obscene, like the way he talks about her and about her age and the nudity and everything. And she's just having to like put on a smiley face and just kind of go along with it. So there was like this little germ there of like if you go to the extreme of like the wish fulfillment of the germ of the idea was like, well, what if inside there is this incredibly powerful, wise creature that actually is like, I could fucking kill you. Like, you know, how do you, you know, not give it a happy ending, but like, how do you kind of twist this power dynamic? And it became kind of then very tied up with, I was obsessed with the extremely tragic and sad story of Jean Seberg, who, as I think she was 16, as a 16-year-old was cast with no prior experience in Otto Preminger's Joan of Arc movie. Right. And at the time, and some of this is kind of riffed on in Immortality, at the time, there was this huge kind of media frenzy where he was casting for this role and he saw thousands of young women and her being cast, like it was the big like Tonight Show equivalent of the time. They announced the winner, and she was brought out on stage and kind of paraded in front of people. And then her experience of shooting that movie was horrific, because she was like, "Hey, I would love some acting lessons. I want to," and she was like acting opposite people like John Gielgud and stuff. Like she was surrounded by experts performing this this incredible play, and he was like, "You don't need acting lessons. I will sculpt you. I will make you great." And he was a complete dick to her, to the point where the scene where Joan of Arc is burned at the stake, they actually fucked up, and Gene Seberg was set on fire.
Oh my god. It's like apocryphal. That's a wow. Okay.
And so that was horrific for her. And then she had to make a second movie with Preminger, which was Bonjour Success. And then she has the break of being in Godard's Breathless. And that's kind of what she's known for and is most iconic. But then after that, like, her career is extremely sad. She never quite gets the kinds of roles she wants or deserves. Her relationships are very complicated and sad. And then it gets even worse towards the end of her life when she's like targeted by the FBI because of her involvement in civil rights and stuff. But particularly like, and again, like this at a very kind of wish fulfillment-y level, it's like trying to take that story and take something, like transform it a little bit, still kind of engage with, and you know, at that point you're thinking about, and as well, like someone that's into, you know, knowing that this game was going to be at this point about cinema, and certainly like the 20th century version of cinema and the history of cinema, and like early on, we weren't completely sure what eras we were going to be kind of straddling, but thinking about like Ambrosio and the original book, The Monk, and the extent to which that book is essentially a film noir. Like you have the authority figure, the cop, who is in this a monk, who's supposed to be you know, the most moral and kind of, you know, upholding all of the laws. And then he's introduced to the femme fatale, Matilda, who essentially then just like destroys him and makes him commit every crime under the sun without even, like, it's such a kind of Jim Thompson film noir style. Like, she doesn't even have to try that hard. She's just kind of like, "Hey, what about this?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'll go poison this person and murder this person and assault this person." Like we'd crack up when we were writing that, because it would be like classical kind of storytelling. We were always like debating, like, is Ambrosio the protagonist of this thing? Because if in kind of conventional storytelling, if he was the protagonist, he should have to fight more. And I think we avoided watching it, but there's a Vincent Cassel adaptation of The Monk that came out fairly recently. And watching the trailer, I was like, okay, I think they centered it on him, made him the protagonist, and maybe he has more of a struggle with the story. But our Ambrosio was true to the book. It was like, he never really struggles. Like she like there's only ever one scene where Matilda will be like, "Do this bad thing," and he's like, "Yeah, okay, I'll do it, I'm horny." But thinking about like the extent to which that book from like the 17th century sets up, you know, it has this tradition and all the tropes of being a film noir. And then when thinking about actresses and the restrictions on them as artists and all the stuff that goes with that, thinking about like pre-code movies and early film noir, and there's this kind of interesting contradiction there of the actresses playing the kind of femme fatales in these classic film noirs. Like, on one hand, actually, here you have female characters that have a huge degree of agency. They are actually the prime drivers of the plot. They are getting to do things and be bad and kill people and win. And they have sexual agency, and they are the most interesting characters and the best roles in those movies.
The smartest characters often.
Yeah.
Outsmarting everyone, yeah.
Totally. And on the other hand, that role exists to titillate men. Like, the femme fatale is there as, you know, this kind of sexy, bad, naughty thing. So, and identifying that role existed in Ambrosio, you know, that, I guess that was kind of the genesis coming out of that, was like thinking about this kind of Gene Seberg type character. And as well, like, I think this was on our list, there is an interesting parallel between Gene Seberg and Jane Fonda, who both started out very young, had very different backgrounds, but and both went through the ringer of boyfriends and directors and, you know, trying to get the work that they deserved. And obviously Jane Fonda had a happier trajectory. But once we started to kind of solidify things, we knew that we wanted to have this jump between Ambrosio and Minsky that was kind of this evolution from the studio system, which to me was the end of the studio system was absolutely captured in like the later, not as good films of Hitchcock, where it's really interesting because like when people talk about Hitchcock being a master of cinema and being pure cinema, that was all tied up in like the artifice of how you shot movies on a studio. It was the matte paintings, it was the use of miniatures, it was all these kind of interesting camera angles. But towards the end of his career, you have the new wave coming from Europe, and you have Godard and people running around with handheld cameras. Things are improvised and more real, and suddenly all those aspects of Hitchcock look incredibly dated. I had the team watch Marnie, and some of them hadn't seen it, and like there are shots in Marnie where it cuts from like location film of a horse, cuts to in the studio, hey, someone doing this on like a horse prop, and it's all like, you know, it's all classic Hitchcock montage, but it looks so fake to you know, the modern eyes. So there was that idea of going from the kind of studio system, and what was really interesting there was, and again going back to those kind of femme fatale characters, was in the studio system, if you're an actress, you were the property of the creation of the studio, right? You had so little agency, and I'd reference Rita Hayworth, right? Rita Hayworth was the one where, you know, Rita Hayworth was originally, you know, she was not white. She had a completely different name. They used plastic surgery. They physically changed her race. Wow. They changed her hairline, skin color. Like they literally painfully remolded her.
Right, yeah.
Gave her name, her identity, etc. And you know, she had this very, you know, kind of intense life. But, you know, from a kind of modern lens, it's like, well, Rita Hayworth has somehow persisted beyond all of that. Like, you know, her as a star and her kind of essence somehow is, you know, we remember that more than we would say the individual movies or the names of the directors or those people that were sculpting her. But the interesting thing was that the jump between that system, and there was this, and I had internalized this as well, this idea that when the old studio system died and we went to the new Hollywood, right? So we went to the Friedkins and Coppolas and the Scorseses and all these kind of real 70s movies with their ambiguous endings and their kind of more human, organic kind of stories going on. There was this idea that that was in some ways an improvement, but really if you dug into it, it's like, well, the studio is no longer sculpting people, but now you have a director who is probably sleeping with the actress as well as directing her. And that same kind of sculpting is happening. But in the case of Jane Fonda, she has this incredible trajectory where in the 70s, and Klute is the movie that for me kind of crystallizes that, she decides to go and do Klute. And Klute is written as, it's two guys, and they're like screenwriters, and they're like, hey, no one's written a really good like prostitute movie. Like, I think now's the time for that. So they set out to write this story about this sex worker. And along comes, you know, Jane Fonda, director, and she is looking for a piece of work that she can make significant and do like important acting in and kind of make her own. And she sees reflected in this character like so much of her life. And at this point, she's in a relationship with Roger Vadim, the French film director, and she is so performatively sexual. Like you think like Barbarella,
Right.
The two of them are having all these kind of big fun group sex things going on and stuff. And so there's no line between her as an actress performing on screen and what's going on. And it's so much tied up in like the 60s sexual revolution, where there is this like fun lie that somehow women have been granted the freedom of their sexuality. And then you kind of look back and you're like, actually, the men seem to do really well out of that. Like the Roger Vadims were really benefiting from Jane Fonda's sexual freedom. But she takes on Clute, and there's this huge thing, and there's a little bit of this in the game, but like she cuts her hair. And this is like, Roger Vadim's like, what are you doing cutting your hair with this, ugly short haircut? Like, I didn't give you permission to cut your hair. Similarly, there's an amazing, going back to Rita Hayworth, when they shot Lady from Shanghai, Rita Hayworth was famous for having this beautiful kind of dark red hair, I guess. And Orson Welles, who was her ex-lover.
Oh, really?
Sorry, Lady from Shanghai. Wow. This was like post-breakup. I can't remember, I think they were married, right? So this was like post-divorce. Okay. He's directing his ex. He has them cut her hair and dye it blonde for this movie. And so the head of the film company is like, what the fuck have you done to my Rita Hayworth? You've like ruined her. So you have these two guys, one of which is like her boss, one of which is like her ex-husband, arguing about who should be in control of her hair. But with Clute, she has this haircut which becomes iconic. And there are these incredible moments in Clute, which were not in the original script, where the character is in therapy. And all of these therapy scenes were added by Jane Fonda. And it's her talking about being Jane Fonda.
Oh, wow.
So you watch them and like everything she's saying is her figuring out her life and what's going on with her and her agency and all these things. So like that to me was like this would have been beautiful if like Gene Seberg had that route out and been able to kind of find that. But then really like the story of the game became kind of taking, on one level, taking the very classic femme fatale role in Ambrosia, where she is literally the devil. Like she's literally the sexy devil.
Succubus, almost, yeah.
And then in Minsky, we have like a proto-erotic thriller where she's the femme fatale, but the character, Marissa really wants the character of Franny to be imbued with more humanity. And she's really into the story of one of Picasso's muses, Françoise Gillot, who was an artist in her own right. She was the only one of Picasso's muses to escape him, to get away with him without like becoming very ill or ending their own life. And she wrote this incredible book, My Life with Picasso, for which she was like shut out of the French intelligentsia because she had dared critique Picasso. But this book is incredible, like because her insight into his art is great, but also like her insight into like him as a very weak and flawed man, and the things that happen between them and him and his other muses. There's a lot there. So like Minsky becomes taking this kind of femme fatale storyline and then trying to imbue it with more, and it's very much like a 70s movie in that here is to some extent a murder mystery, but we want you to root for the murderer, right? Like it's, and there's that kind of ambiguity, which was a funny thing actually, because we got Alan Scott to come in and do the writing on Minsky. And he wrote Don't Look Now, a couple of other rogue movies. Like Don't Look Now is probably in my top 5 movies of all time. So we were like, let's get someone from the 70s to come in and write our 70s movie. So he delivered us his final version of Minsky, and it had a happy ending. And I was like, that's not how 70s movies worked. I watched all these movies. Like there's always a sad, ambiguous ending, right? It's like the best one is, this isn't quite a 70s movie, but it feels like one. The Pacino movie, Cruising. The end of that movie, like Friedkin has not told you who the killer was. Was it Pacino? Was it not? What's going on? Has Pacino become like this is a movie where Pacino goes undercover in the gay leather bar scene in New York. And by the end of the movie, you're like, has he realized he's into that shit? Like,
Right.
none of this is explained.
Nothing's resolved.
And he shows up in his apartment with his leather outfit that he had, and his girlfriend picks up the hat and is like, what the fuck is this? And it just cuts to a shot of Pacino looking in the mirror going, and you're like, what does that mean? Like, what is, you've not resolved anything. Like, was he the serial killer? Was he not? So to me, that's like the archetypal 70s thing. It's like you go out on like, I recommended they watch 3 Days of the Condor the other day, and they're like, oh my God, like that ending. But those wonderful endings where you know, it's not, it just leaves something stuck in you that you can't quite get rid of. So we were like, okay, we're gonna tweak that. We're gonna make sure that this ending has the kind of ending we want. And then you get to like the 90s where, and the 90s became our era because, like, if a lot of this was me revisiting that idea of 70s New Hollywood as being like the dream, right? Of like, oh, this was when the real art was being created. This was the high point of cinema. And then kind of interrogating that and being like, well, we think of these guys as auteurs, but like Friedkin didn't want to direct The Exorcist. He was like, this is some pulpy paperback. Coppola didn't want to direct The Godfather. Again, both of these guys were like 20th on the list. And the studios are like, hey, we got this extremely successful book. Can you adapt it? And it's like, I want to do my own shit, right? I want to do my original things. But then it ends up being, unlike The Godfather is 50% Gordon Willis's photography. He also shot Clute. At the time when they were shooting it, Coppola hated it and was like, why is everything underlit? Like, this looks terrible. All my notes so that no one can see anything. You can't even see Brando in this scene. And now when you look back, you're like, oh my God, that's like, that's the vibe of that movie. So, you know, the more, and then as well, just like, again, interrogating, realizing not just like how frequently the directors are sleeping with the lead actresses, but I think he was like 99.9%. Like, all those power structures are right in there. All these kind of things that are difficult now, and you see this a little bit post Me Too of like, oh, but that's my favorite movie. Like, I don't want to have to like, oh, and like
Death of the author and all that, yeah.
There's something like, you know, Tango in Paris, which was so pivotal and was like held up as being such a watershed moment in movie making in terms of that personal, visceral look into people's intimate relationships, to now realize that actually it's a sex crime. Right. There's people that are like, I get it, but I really don't want to have to take that out of my personal canon, right? So it's, you know, all of that kind of interrogating of the 70s. Like, I was obsessed with the movies of Nick Roeg. Like, a lot of when we did Telling Lies, I was thinking about Nick Roeg. And again, just like digging into that, like we watched Performance a bunch of times when we were making this, and that's just like the coolest fucking movie. Performance has just such a vibe. And, you know, one of the really telling things, specifically with the kind of Me Too angle, was I watched a documentary and they had Nick Roeg reminiscing about this movie. And there's like a bit in the movie where there's kind of like a mini orgy on a bed with Jagger and Fox and everybody. And Nick Roeg is reminiscing about it. He's like, oh, that was so much fun. It was just the actors and me with a camera, and I was in amongst them, and you didn't know whose limbs were whose. It was so great. Like, it was just such a fun vibe. And then there was an interview with one of the actresses, and she was like, actually, I felt very uncomfortable. Yeah. And then one of the youngest actress in it, who's fantastic in that movie, she ends her own life 2 years after the movie.
Oh my goodness.
Like, really struggled with her mental health. And you're just like, oh, man. So there was that kind of interrogating, on my part anyway, of the 70s. So then like the 90s was really interesting because for me, like, you know, the 80s was that kind of trash era where everything was horrible and cocaine and money. And then in the 90s, you have this new wave of young filmmakers who idolize the 70s. So they're trying to, and I think like even Tarantino's like on the record as saying like, oh, the 90s was actually kind of our 70s. But you have, you know, Thomas Anderson, people like that, trying to make things that either directly evoke the 70s or at least in that kind of moral ambiguity or ambition or darkness evoke the 70s. And you also have like the neo-noir thing that pushes through the 90s, which ties us back. So then the idea of like two of everything is, well, now the format has shifted. So actually now the protagonist is both the kind of perpetrator and the victim and the revenger. And so it's kind of this neo-noir, and it's still like the same problems are still there. In fact, it's even worse, right? Like the villains in Two of Everything, who are the epitome of like money and power and everything that is rotten in our world. And we were doing all this before the Epstein stuff
Right.
blew up. So, and I think that was happening as we were like prepping. So it was like, yep, this is.
Well, it's, like you said, there's always something, because like the Romeo and Juliet stuff happened a month ago. Like, and what you're literally doing is like referencing like decades of this exact systemic thing, which is like a monster with many faces. So,
and like for me, the spark of Two of Everything was seeing a video of Jennifer Lopez do a birthday performance for this Eastern European oligarch.
oh God,
I think this video is online, and I'm like, and this was like at the height of her fame.
right?
So it's like she is one of the most powerful and rich and successful singers doing her thing, but she's flying over, and she not only like did some songs for his birthday, but delivered this impassioned speech about how much she loved him and was grateful to be there, and then said, "I'm now going to perform a song that I've never performed in public before, just for you." And I was like, oh, talk about like selling your soul.
Right.
Like, and that to me was like the forces of like the commercial and the artistic. Like there's taking the money, and then there's taking the money and being like, this is the first time I've performed this song live just for you. Like, to me, I was like, that's so corrupt. So really that's, the story of Two of Everything is, there are two characters in it, but if you treat this essentially as the same character, and one part of them has been broken, right, and the innocent, they lose their innocence, and that is the side of them that's punished, and they ultimately kind of overcome that. So that's, there is this sense of trying to see this role and the perspective kind of evolve, but there is a kind of a thread running through it.
Yeah.
It's-
I was just going to say, it feels like Immortality must have been kind of cathartic for you, because in the way that you're saying a lot of people have to interrogate works of art that they love because the people who made them or were involved with them were problematic, or problematic things happened in the course of making these pieces of art. It feels like Immortality is constantly asking the question of is art worthwhile? What is the purpose of art? And is the role of being a creative person, especially a creative person, or maybe specifically a creative person who harnesses the abilities of other people, is that a parasitic relationship? And if so, like, what is the end goal of that? Is it just to immortalize the ego of one individual? And even then, it's like you said, it's kind of that the ego that's immortalized is also kind of shaped and curated. So it's not even like a reflection of the person who's making it. It's kind of this like fake version of everyone involved. So yeah, it was like, did this feel cathartic for you? Because it does feel like a game or a story to me that is highly critical of art as much as it expresses, I mean, your love for cinema is in every second of this game, but I constantly was feeling like, damn, this is a piece of art that is so highly critical of art itself.
Catharsis is definitely like the process of, definitely like it was coming from, and like the joke with the format of it was like, we're trying to destroy and break movies down so we can rebuild them. It was kind of like there is a frustration on my part with how slowly we've evolved the form and done interesting things given where we are technically.
With games.
With games and movies and like whatever that intersection is. So there was definitely, but like you say, when I was growing up, I was obsessed with movies. Like I've always just have such a love for movies. And like I say that, there are points where there's one scene where young Marissa Marcel, who has probably been fed this by Durek, gives her kind of sermon about the magic of cinema, capturing her flesh on camera or whatever. And I'm like, I'm kind of with that. Like, there's genuinely like some cool shit. Like, you put all these people, there's something so beautifully perverse about cinema where you're trying to capture the truth, but you have to do so much fakery to get there, right? And I think if there is a side that the game comes on and that catharsis comes from it, is that I do believe there is some truth that emerges from it, right? There is something that we capture, whether that is going and watching Breathless and seeing Gene Seberg come alive on the camera and have that moment. And that's the moment that's persisted, not her dying in a car on some random back street in Paris. Like and I think for me, a lot of it came through and like the actual filming of this was excruciating. Because it was, we planned it all so that we were going to be in a good place with COVID because the vaccines were coming and everything else. So we did our pre-pro and everything was looking good. And then like the Delta stuff hit.
Right.
And just every day was excruciating. So the actual act, every day I woke up thinking this will be the day I have to cancel. I have to pull the plug. I have to be the grown up and accept that we're not going to be able to finish this. And rather than lose all the money, let's try and only lose 2/3 of it, whatever. So there was definitely a point, and especially like there is the thread running through Two of Everything of like them pushing themselves and realizing perfection and is unachievable, which was drawing very much from like the final days of Stanley Kubrick and how he did literally kill himself making Eyes Wide Shut. And that was in real time, that was happening to us. And I was like, this is becoming such a struggle and is so hard. It's life imitating art and it's horrendous. But the thing that was beautiful for me was Charlie's character, who is, you know, the essence of Marissa Marcel and her soul or whatever. You know, and we spoke to so many different people for that role and ended up casting Charlie, which was such a good choice. Because of like the intensity of her gaze and just so much of what she brings. And you know, so the filming of this thing was a struggle. And particularly like Charlie's role was a struggle because the practicalities of filming under so much pressure was that we would usually shoot like Manon stuff and then have to bring Charlie in.
Oh, right. Yeah.
After to do that version. And there was sometimes like a costume swap and like, so it was, so there was always more pressure on what Charlie was doing. And she's obviously having to go to places that often are quite intense emotionally. We're all like under this COVID thing. No one can speak to each other on set. Like as a director, I'm having to shout my instructions to people. Like the stuff you would usually have in a film set where you go for a drink afterwards and there's constant kind of pressure valves, like none of that existed.
Right.
We had like one drink in a parking lot one day and my line producer came out and was so angry with us and like looked at me and he was like, Sam, this is your fucking money. Like, what are you doing? And I was like, we need a drink. Like, this is really hard. And I think like, you know, I'm a very strong disbeliever in this idea that if you want your actors to be sad, be mean to them, right? Like Adrienne Lyne on 9.5 Weeks being complete shit to Kim Basinger so that she would put that into her performance is horrendous. Like all those kind of historical things. But there was definitely an element of watching Charlie come out and seeing towards the end of that story this sense of having gone from being like, in my view, like the 70s stuff, hanging out with the Warhol kids, working on Minsky is like when Marissa Marcel's the happiest. Like that world, the fluidity of it, the kind of spirit of it is vibing. That love that everyone at that point has for movies and this new way of making them is a high point. But then when you get to Two of Everything and they're trying really hard to get something across and they're trying to do it in a simpler form. There was a conversation we had actually with Alan. He was talking about him and Nick Rogue doing, I can't remember what the movie was now, but they both agreed that if you wanted to say something really deep, you have to say it in a genre movie because that's the best way to kind of sneak your message up to the audience, is to kind of package it in genre. So this idea that and that she's trying so hard and she's stretching herself thin, and she's performing the two roles, and it's, taking its toll. We're all feeling that, like, as we're shooting it. And as written, if I had been doing the acting, which was never going to happen because I'm terrible as an actor, but like, there was definitely a version of Charlie's character that is becoming more distant from her humanity as she struggles. But I think what Charlie brought to it was really that level of emotion and involvement where you really felt that she was still kind of like, that she had this kind of love for things, and the pain was made even more so. And this idea that she contains within her all these other people that she's kind of been over the years and stuff. So I got a lot of, I think the catharsis really crystallized in that, of like, yes, there is still, despite everything, right, there is still this kind of worth and this truth and this kind of humanity to these things that these people are making, that in itself kind of has that to it. So yeah, I think that, that was, it's hard to think of it as a catharsis personally, just because the experience of shooting through that, and then the post-production, and then the effort of getting a video game out, just annoyingly kind of just stretches everything out, right? You don't have like this big moment. I'm always very envious of like movie people who get to have like a premiere, right? Or a big launch, because you have like your launch day in games, but it's so abstract and weird.
And it's
you just
sat a busy day of fixing things maybe as well.
Busy day, and it starts with you just sat, and with this we were like over Zoom, and it's like, okay, who's going to click the green button? Right. Click the green button. Okay, it's out. See what happens, right? And like you say, it didn't used to be this way, because it used to be that you had your gold master disc a couple of months before release, and that was the stress. But once that disc was approved, you're kind of okay. But now, because you can patch and fix, and because there's so many more weird computers out there, and people and people, and it's really hard, because the people that are playing your game and loving it are probably not messaging you incessantly on those first few days, but the people who bought the game and it's crashing or something else, right? Those are the people that are sending you angry emails, and every single one, it's a real human being telling you they're angry at you because your game doesn't work, and you feel every single one of those. And again, you probably, like, if you put a movie out, you don't have that. Like, you go to the premiere, you show your movie, it's not going to have any bugs because it's a movie. But even then, like, you show it, there's an audience, everyone claps, and then you might read some reviews and some people bitching and stuff. But like, you don't get an email saying your movie did not install on my graphics card. I'm really mad because this is my $20. This is all I have to spend on games this month. Like,
so you get to enjoy the best and worst of both mediums. It sounds like.
So it's definitely like a real roller coaster. I know a lot of devs, especially on the indie side, who had really dark times after releasing quite successful games, because it's weird, because even if and sometimes where they have really big successes, it's even weirder because the success is so abstract, and they're still sat at home on the computer looking at things, and there's all these people playing and enjoying their game, and their brain is like, okay, the game's out, it was a huge success, this is everything I wanted, why don't I feel any different? Like, where does my life go now? And it's like a really weird setup.
There's an interesting aspect to the, games, in that you mentioned, like, you can sort of like infinitely tweak these things post-launch, and obviously a lot of there's similarities between games and movies in any creative endeavor, where the vision you had changes during the process of making it and all that sort of stuff. But one of the things that really stood out to me, kind of as a sensitive or difficult part of this process, maybe, is just how much trust you have to put into, like, what ends up on the celluloid, like casting the right person, and making sure that also when you're, you can infinitely change the character model or right up until the end of the day, but at a certain point when you've sort of filmed the stuff and you've captured the performance, that's what you have to kind of go with. What was the process of, like, casting? I feel like Manon, obviously, because she just has so much of the heavy lifting, and so many different characters and so many different layers of abstraction of the characters and stuff. Like, did you do your tour of France for 200 girls to come in to do, like, how did you, especially because like also a lot of these actors are fairly new faces as well, I believe. Was it her first role out of acting school as well?
Yeah, I think she was, I believe, if I'm not misspeaking, I think she had like a extra role in Mank, which is very
right. The Fincher,
but it did not make it to the screen, right?
Oh.
So like that was, so this was, first starring role and first big thing. I mean, the casting was cool. I mean, the casting is always so important, so critical, but you're always up against the challenge of like, hey, we don't have a huge budget. We're a weird video game. So, sometimes that just means the door closes, right? You'll go out to people and their agent will be like, we don't want to do a video game. But then and it's changed, I think, more and more over the years, because now you will get a lot of actors that are like, I really want to do a video game. And then you tell them about these things and they're like, oh, that doesn't sound like a video game. Right. You're like, okay.
Yeah, that's a good point. The video games you're making are more like movies for the actor than for everyone else. It's probably both. But yeah, that's a different. It's an extra wrinkle you have to contend with, I guess.
But yeah, we knew that obviously Marissa was critical to the whole thing, which I guess is always true. But I'm my own worst enemy, because I do keep making these things where I'm like, oh crap, like if this character can't do these 10 layers, the whole thing will just not work. So we knew it was critical, and the two things we focused on were, we wanted to try and authentically tap into this idea of her freshness, right, and of her evolution, of the kind of the real world concept of what Marissa Marcel is. So very much like the Gene Seberg story of her coming in as this newbie, and then becoming more and more experienced across the 3 movies. So we knew that, and I knew, like, I'd done a few things before. I did this this small interactive pilot thing for MGM based on war games, where we were trying to cast like a young woman in her kind of late teens, I guess. And that's like it's a really hard point to do your casting at, because if somebody is famous or successful at that young age, there's not as many of them, right? Because they haven't had the time to be established. There's also a higher barrier in terms of like who's actually developed the skills at this point.
Yeah.
So the few people that are really successful at that age are now extremely famous and are probably now in a Marvel movie or something. So you're kind of wrestling with that. And then we found that there were 2 schools of approaching this. There was the actors who had started out as like child actors, not necessarily through Nickelodeon and Disney, but that's like a lot of them, who had done all the child acting, but were now at a point where they wanted to make that shift into doing more serious things. So they would have all of the on-set experience, like be extremely professional. Like Vivian, who I worked with on Telling Lies, who was 7, the most professional actor I've ever worked with. Just unbelievable. Like, would ask me, give me notes, would be like just incredible. So you had that kind of school of thought. And then the other option was someone kind of like Manon, who has been to school, has done a lot of intense theater and stuff, but is less experienced on a film set, right? Is more untested. And then when we spoke to people, we would have them come in and do a scene from each of the movies. So they'd do 3 bits. So we'd see what is their Matilda like? What is their Franny like? What is their Maria like? And then they did one scene that was just like a kind of Marissa scene. And that was like really fascinating, because there were some people that came in and you'd be like, if we were just doing Minsky,
right,
they would be perfect for this, right? Oh, if we were just doing Two of Everything, they would be this incredible version of that character. But then it was a much smaller list of people where we were like, oh no, they did all three. And there's this continuity. And I think like Manon, well, just like stood out because of how she tackled the three roles and everything. But also like the type of actor I tend to enjoy working with is the one where we can just talk for like 2 hours about the character in the background. And like the first, even in like the first casting session with Manon, she was like taking notes, and I'm mentioning characters or movies or things that have happened, and she's making notes to go and watch them and stuff. Because I think definitely like as a writer director and as someone that is making these things that are intensely kind of structured and dense, my process tends to be doing like a shit ton of research and thinking and mapping out, and then you boil that down into the script. And obviously what the joy of the actors is they come in and they kind of then unpack all of that again and squeeze it down even more to like just a look on the screen, right? Or something in their face, whatever. So the actors that have that same kind of approach where they want to talk things through and they want to get, really detailed to the point where then you can show up on set and forget everything, because they'll just kind of carry that with them. So I think Mano was someone like that. I think she was in the running from as soon as we saw her, like she was in kind of our short list. So it's terrifying when you're trying to, because you're like, I think we have the right person, right? And again, like you don't have the resources.
Like the first day of shooting or something, or like 2 weeks in, you're like, oh no, I think we're okay.
Well, I mean, you have like rehearsals.
Did you rehearse much for this? Because COVID presumably was also still an issue.
We didn't have we never have as much time to rehearse as I want. And because I do these things which often end up as one take kind of setups,
right?
Often it makes sense to get in and we'll usually block things on the day and then kind of run them a few times to get their legs. Because then, if you're asking someone, do this whole 5-minute chunk, you're always going to need a bit of time to just on the day find that rhythm to get a good version of it. So, practically we usually put some of the rehearsal on the day on the set. So we'll get there and we'll do it before they get into costume and makeup. We'll run through the scene and we'll figure out where we want to put the camera and stuff. But we had like a couple of read-throughs, and then we'd read anything with stunts or intimacy would have to be a rehearsal. So there were quite a few scenes that we got a free rehearsal out of because of that. But yeah, you kind of, I think as soon as you've made the decision, once you then just get into it with the actor, then everything's, that's it. Like this has always been the character.
Right. You probably
it's right up until that point though, you're very aware. And again, like part of the like story here is I was really interested in, and the more you dig into film history, it's not just the kind of behind the scenes stuff that was going on. It's like realizing, oh, this film was originally going to star a completely different actor, or like Eyes Wide Shut's a fantastic example of, like they shot out the whole movie with Harvey Keitel, and then because they kept shooting, he had to go. There's like I won't detail it here, but there's like a fascinating, I'm sure, made up story of the reason why Harvey Keitel was kicked off Eyes Wide Shut, which is entirely obscene and made up, I'm sure. But so they reshot the whole thing, bringing in a different actor, and I think Jennifer Jason Leigh was in it as well. Like that's a movie where they were actually like filming it with people and then moving those people out.
Bizarre.
But even weirder, so like with Eyes Wide Shut, Kubrick was trying to make that movie his entire career. He was obsessed with it. There was a version he wanted to make in which Woody Allen would have been the Tom Cruise character.
God.
That is a bullet dodged, right?
Yeah, absolutely. These are like the horrible alternative universes we could find ourselves living in. Although actually, the Harvey Keitel one, I kind of do want to check.
I do want to
out.
see that one.
Yeah.
I mean, they must have. I think Kubrick was someone that did actually destroy the negatives.
Okay, you're right.
Because he
Over my
he
dead
didn't
body.
want people to like.
Yeah.
you know,
Recut a different version.
tweak things and stuff he wanted.
Right.
I mean, he himself kept tweaking and editing stuff after release, but so I'm not even sure. I feel like I would have seen it if it existed, but that doesn't exist. But yeah, the Woody Allen version of Eyes Wide Shut
Jesus Christ.
was who else? There was. I feel like there was another comedian. I want to say like Steve Martin. There was a version which was much more like comic in his head. John le Carre wrote a treatment for Eyes Wide Shut. Wow. Like everyone in the world came in and did their
like Dune
take on it.
Yeah. Just all the versions that could have existed. And
so that knowing that, like, that is always like one of the most fascinating, because you know, Eyes Wide Shut is Tom Cruise constantly thinking about sex but not having it. Like, that's the movie. Like, it's impossible to imagine a version. You can't imagine The Shining without Jack Nicholson.
Ex-wife at that stage?
No, they were together.
That was the end.
Massive tabloid scrutiny during that whole shoot. That was like part of it. And I think Kubrick, you know, which is why it's also interesting and relevant to this project, like Kubrick really allowed that mystique to be part of the film. I think he enjoyed that the tabloids were like, oh my God, they're doing real sex scenes. It's Tom and Nicole. This is like crazy. There were rumors that they were seeing a sex therapist during Eyes Wide Shut.
Right.
And I'm not sure it was like, I don't think officially Kubrick put those rumors out there, but like, I feel like, and he did like famously, I think Eyes Wide Shut was Kubrick's best grossing movie. Although I think, you know, now it's the hipster choice for my favorite Kubrick movie, right? But it's not seen as necessarily being his best. But at the time, the initial reception was quite poor. And so much of that was tied up in, he put out a teaser trailer, and the soundtrack to it was Baby's Done a Bad, Bad Thing. It was like, and it made the movie look like the sexiest, most erotic, like sexy, kinky, erotic thriller movie going. So that was everyone's expectation. And then you went and saw it. And again, it was a movie about Tom Cruise not having sex, right?
It's like Jarhead, but for Tom Cruise's balls. Put that on the poster.
But yeah, so yeah, when it comes to casting, you just right up until that moment. And here there were two. Manon was always, I think, number one. And there was another one who was the kind of child actor now looking to shift. So they kind of definitely tapped into the baby Gene Seberg version. But I never quite 100% felt like she should get us all the way and make as much sense later on in the movie and stuff. So in the game. So, but yeah, it was, I mean, the cliche that like directing is 90% casting is kind of true. Like
any
you really
cliche, there's a sprinkle of truth in there somewhere.
Yeah, if you get the right people that then show up and have the right rapport, you can just kind of let them go and they'll surprise you and do cool things. And like everybody on this was great. There was one guy who wasn't great, and luckily we swapped him out. He was like the only guy, and he's probably not listening to this, but like he was the only, everyone else in the cast was lovely. And this was such a hard shoot amidst COVID and everything else, and just the general difficulty of what we were doing. And he was the one guy where we were like, oh fuck, like he's gonna just
make
drag
this even
down.
harder. My favorite like B character in your wide cast is the who I forget the name, the guy in the final movie, the bad guy in the final movie, the antagonist, basically. Hessenberg? The scummy guy in the back of the limo. He is so, like, his levels of him being a shithead are just, like, amazing.
And he has the contrast. I remember I had a call with Jocelyn, who plays his wife, who's also extremely evil.
Yes.
And like the first call, I think like she was like slightly uncomfortable about how evil her character was. And so she just wanted to like hear from me, like, why is this like, what are we doing here? But I think in reading the script, you don't realize what is in the final product, which is you see also so much more of the actress Amy playing the evil character. And Amy is absolutely not evil. And it really balances stuff out. So again, I think so many of these names get changed when you have to get clearance for them. So sometimes I'll remember characters with the wrong name. But like I think Terry is the actor who's playing the evil kind of Epstein-like character. And so the real life version of the fictional, the actor into of everything that's playing him is really nice, right? So like as soon as the scene finishes, he checks in with like Marissa, like, he's feeling okay doing this, right? Which is a thing that you see, like I've worked with some really nice actors, and yeah, you'll have like these extremely dark, violent, horrible scenes.
Right.
And then as soon as you cut, like there is this just need to reassure each other that like that was all pretend. You're good. You're happy with how that went. So yeah, getting that, it made it easier to have those characters be so evil because it allowed those actors to just embrace that, knowing that they would get to then turn it off, so that they weren't committing themselves to being these kind of pure evil characters.
I'm a little conscious of time. Do you have time for a couple more questions?
Yeah, let's do a couple more and then we can.
No worries. Yeah. Well, there's one aspect that I really want to talk about because it's something that comes up a lot myself and Jeremy, which is religion. And there's some sort of there's mythological, perhaps aspects to this story, and obviously just getting deeper into the spoilery stuff. But Jeremy is a student of both film and religion, and I'm a recovering Catholic, so it often comes up in our sort of musings on.
We had so many Catholics on set who were like, "Oh shit, I can't tell my parents we're shooting this."
But and there's been a couple of games over the past year and a half that have used some aspect of Christian mythology within their works in really interesting ways, some directly, some indirectly. Obviously this is, there's a lot in here. It's not necessarily referencing things directly. Sometimes it sort of winks to it, but I'm just interested in and Jeremy, feel free to jump in as well, that you're sort of where that was coming from, your own personal experience with religion, or what you were trying to put across, or was it more of a bedrock that you could sort of pull from that people understood? You know what I mean?
I think it was an element of thinking about it and deconstructing and being to some extent aware of my blind spots, like all of the filmmakers I grew up with, a lot of the writing I grew up with, the art I grew up with is all grounded in a Western Christian tradition, right? And so all of our stories are constantly riffing on the kind of Christ story and the biblical story, and all of the art I grew up having to appreciate, half of it was literal, kind of religious scenes and in that tradition. And then getting into all the gold, when I was a teenager, I would kind of alternate hardcore French literature written by women and pulpy sci-fi, new age sci-fi written by men. And I was kind of aware that if I go all out on this stuff, it's going to poison my brain. So I need somebody reading Marguerite Duras and then a bunch of Philip K. Dick or whatever. But all of that kind of 60s psychedelic, pulpy, golden age sci-fi stuff was always constantly digging into and evoking the kind of religious metaphor. So there was, and it runs throughout all of that kind of Western art and film to some extent. I love watching Paul Verhoeven explain how RoboCop is Christ. He's like, look, he walks across the water and says, now you'll see the halo around the head. Oh, RoboCop is the American Christ. And he's explaining it. And you see his stigmata. He's, So it's that image that somewhat I don't want to say cheaply, but it's just this source throughout. Also, for me, kind of going back and essentially, that was the original cinema, right? That's right. Those stories. And I was, again, not to become too much of a over the top cinephile, but there is something. I'm sure I could quote some director somewhere saying, the cinema being a religious moment, but remember Robert McKee, who is the Hollywood screenwriting guru, who's actually he's not that bad. People love to shit on screenwriting gurus, and he's hilarious. If you ever see him live as a stand-up, he is twice as good as he is as a screenwriting guru. And he's an old misogynistic dude, so there's that aspect. But he when he's lecturing, he'll be in the olden days, well, he talks about like the perfect form of story is this combination of emotion and idea. And in your everyday life, you can feel things emotionally, right? You see someone drop down dead in front of you, you feel that emotionally. A week later, it makes you think about mortality, and you have ideas, right? And when you go and watch a movie or a story that you intensely feel, that distance plus emotional closeness creates this incredible synthesis of the emotion and the idea, which he said is what was the religious experience. Like, that's what you got from religion in the olden days, through music, through story, through painting, was this combination of like emotion and idea. And like, the crucifixion is kind of the highlight of that, right? Of just like this intense agony and the humanity of Jesus combined with all these kind of metaphysical ideas and everything. So that was in there. And there was like a part of me 100% with this game was getting a little bit sick of like Marvel stuff and the way in which modern media has to create the mythology and the extended universe and all this elaborate like pulling in of all these other bits. And so with like, as much as it's self-contained, like with Immortality, it's like, I want to do like the Sam Barlow extended universe of like, have that ridiculous scope, right? And kind of epicness to the narrative of like, oh, it's this big, like this huge fantasy story tied to what we were showing on screen. But like, I wanted to just like have fun with some of what's fun about engaging with those mythological stories, of being like, oh no, this is this character of immense power, or there's this timeline to this story, and kind of play with that and interrogate it and kind of fuck around with it. But it was only, it didn't even cross my mind that there was anything potentially controversial about that. And like, I grew up loving like Ken Russell and stuff, so I'm used to like Ken Russell with his excessive religious imagery. It's all good. But then we get on set and we're rehearsing it, and like I say, like half the cast were hardcore Catholics.
Right.
And like our producer, our programmer, like has like a strong Catholic background, and they're all, and then we would then get to set, and then Manon would show up and be dressed as the Virgin Mary, and then we're doing shit, and suddenly I'm like, yeah, no, okay, I could see,
Yeah.
we're going there, but it's fun. It's all good. But yeah, I particularly, I think this is a slight bit in there. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's all right.
I'm fascinated by the kind of turning point in the history of Christianity where I'm not like a huge scholar on this, but like, as I understand it, like coming out of the Dark Ages, you have this promotion of the Virgin Mary and the idea of sin and sex being tied up in that, and that as a contrast to what had gone before, and as a way of taking some of the pagan myths and stuff, and turning them into a very different new version of them, and then going into the Victorian era, like a lot of those ideas to do with like gender and sexuality were this invention, right? That was essentially, and the idea, and then you have people now arguing about real life laws that, my microphone got so excited, real life laws that like should be enacted based on some of these ideas that, and so the idea of like the kind of historical Christ and the origins of all this myth, to me, is really interesting, and it's like, there's a teeny bit of that in there being thrown in there in this, but that is all tied up in this idea of storytelling.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up sort of like the literal historical Christ versus like the mythological story version of it, and kind of the message of that, because I kept thinking when I was playing Immortality, especially when it got to these religious portions, or Christ and Mary being the one and the other one, about how not like, I guess the parallel between religion and cinema is there's I can't remember the exact quote, but there's a Joseph Campbell idea where he talks about how religion is supposed to be like a stained glass window, essentially, and that if it becomes opaque and you're paying attention to the literal form of the stained glass window, you've totally lost the plot. And it's funny you bring up Marvel, because I think that, I don't think Marvel movies are irredeemable. I personally don't really like them, but I think a lot of what they highlight that I think is kind of a negative force in art is an obsession with these figures, with like the actors who are playing these characters, and the reveal of like, we're bringing back Ant-Man, or like Ant-Man 4 is coming out next, or like the little teases at the end of these movies about more kind of like metatextual continuation of your ability to exist in this world. And it's funny that Immortality focuses so much on these actors as individuals, because I feel like as you get to know them, it shifts more and more towards pointing to this fact that that art is less about these individuals and about the immortality of them as individuals, and more about sort of like the emotional packet of like human information that is contained within that art. And in that way, I feel like cinema and religion are kind of the same thing. It's like you're supposed to, all of these characters, all of these themes and stories, and all of these things are like self-destructing mechanisms to deliver that like emotional packet. And so if you're focusing too much on like, oh, like so-and-so is going to be in this movie, or like this movie was made by this guy, or it's kind of like you're getting lost in the metatext, when what you're supposed to be feeling is like the emotional impact of those things or something. So yeah, I thought the religious cinema stuff was really, really fascinating in this. There's not really a question there.
No, I like it. Yeah, no, the riffing. That's the point. Sometimes it's not even about having the fucking questions. It's about thinking on it. And I felt that way with Immortality. We all took a bit of time off and then just sort of chewed the fat about it. It's not a game that, there's lots of movies you mentioned as well in the 70s that you walk away with questions, and this game appeared to be asking more questions than it was trying to provide me with answers or something like that.
Which I think is the point. There was I can't remember who it was. This is quite recent. I think someone was like, "What is the theme of your movie?" or something to some director, and they were like, "If I could put it into words, I wouldn't need to make a movie." Right? Like if I could say something as trite as X, Y, Z, I could just write that on a piece of paper and it'd be an aphorism and I'm done. But like and that's definitely what I love about the vague format that the last few games have been exploring. Is what I think I'm doing is, whereas a normal movie or a normal game usually has this fixed finished product that has been calibrated, and then you give it to the audience, right? And you sit in the cinema and you 90 minutes, the images are beamed into your brain, and you can think about the stuff and dig into it. All of these kind of earlier decisions and interrogations and getting to that point are the artists and the cast, everybody trying to answer these questions and kind of play with it. And what I love about my games is actually being able to bring the audience into that slightly earlier kind of moment where things are slightly more in flux and it is exploratory.
Right.
So like a point I made somewhere the other week was, a lot of times when you talk about these things, everyone gets very fixated on plot, right? Like, well, how can it work if the scenes are in different orders? Like, if you get the ending first, how could that possibly work? And it's like, well, plot is really, it's arbitrary, right? Like, you could take Pulp Fiction and sell it in a linear order, or you could take Breaking Bad, right, where they would have the flash forward at the start of the season and then work their way back to it. You could take all of these stories and re-edit them and rearrange them. Nick Rogue, when he made Bad Timing, filmed it linearly as it was written, and then in the edit made it a complete kind of kaleidoscope. And really what plot is, in the case of, say, a movie, is you have a human being sat in a dark room in an uncomfortable seat for 90 minutes, not moving, staring straight ahead, pretending all this shit on screen is real, and you don't want them to get distracted. So you've got to keep their eye on the ball. And so the plot often in a movie or a TV show or a book keeps you engaged, because it's constantly, you're thinking about what happens next, what happens next, what happens next, what happens next. And that's what stops you from going like, oh, my arse hurts. Like, this is, I really,
my legs
need to hydrate. Yeah. And the beautiful thing with video games is because you are engaged, because we have other things like challenge, exploration, expression, there are other things which keep you engaged in the work. So we can take the plot isn't as rigid as important. And so then for me, the story becomes about theme and about character. And so, then that to me is what's exciting, is that all these things that you sit down to write this or start with this in the beginning. And I'm like, I want to think about what I think about movies and stories and acting. And I go off and do my research and think about it and discuss it with people and build it up. Like, I want you to be kind of closer to that moment where we're all kind of wrestling with these things. But like you say, if I knew the answer, or if I could write a sentence that was like, this is the point of this thing, the game wouldn't need to exist. Whereas,
right, yeah.
So it is very much like, let's think about these things and dig into them, and there isn't a yes or no answer. Like, it's very complicated and fun.
Yeah. And
what a fascinating creative ground you found yourself in, and sort of invented for yourself in many ways, because there's very few people making the games you're going to do that you're creating. I'm almost about to wrap it up. Jeremy, what were we going to jump in?
I was just going to say that I think it's interesting because when you land on a concrete sentence that this is the theme of this piece of art, it often doesn't hit in the way that it does when it's delivered through story and plot and character. And I think that is a huge part of the reason that cinema is so powerful, or that games are powerful, is because it bypasses sort of the cynical part of if the theme of a movie is that love and connection are the most important thing. If I said that to you, you'd be like, yeah. Like, don't give me that Hallmark bullshit. But if I tell you a story and get you invested in these characters, and then at the end of the movie, that is the theme, you're like, oh my God, like, love and connection is the only thing that matters. It's like, it's the same words, but you've put meat on the bones of those platitudes or something. It bypasses our ability to just, our pattern recognition. That's like, yeah, I've heard that before.
Or the various interpretations that lie therein. Me and my wife watched The Banshees of Inisherin just a couple of days ago, and of course I'm from Ireland and she's from America, and we had completely different lenses through which we watched that
Phil was
movie.
too sad, man. My producer Natalie just watched it for the second time. She loves it, and I was like, it was too sad. It's too sad. I just wanted Colin Farrell to be happy. I wanted to see him having a pint. I wanted him to just have a pint with his mate. And throughout it, I'm just constantly like, is it gonna redeem it? Are they gonna? And it was just too sad for me. That was. I saw like 3 movies in the space of a week, and they were all it was the first full-on post-COVID movies I saw, where it felt
yes, yeah.
This was written during COVID or dealing with COVID. There was Tar and this one and another one. And it was I was like, this is a guy who was thinking dark thoughts during COVID. This is what happened to Martin McDonagh. Sat at home during COVID. He didn't make him happy.
Thinking about his mates who aren't calling him up anymore, who doesn't see. Yeah. And here I am watching it, and halfway through, my brain has decided this is a parable about the Irish Civil War. And I'm watching it through a completely different, and who fucking knows? You know what I mean? And that's the beauty of this stuff, right? So it's great. We're in the privileged position of playing and watching them, and you're in the privileged position of making them. So thanks very much. Sam, appreciate your time today. Congratulations on a great game and great 2022, and best of luck in 2023.
Thanks, guys. It's been fun.
Yeah, pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.